Hello and welcome to Teresa Talks Comics, the artcast where I discuss topics of interest for comic creators. In today's artcast, I will be talking about improving your comics. I'm going to divide the show in two sections. First, I'm going to be talking about what exactly is it that we need to improve and what are we talking about when we talk about improving comics. And in the second section, I'm going to be talking about how to make these improvements. And I'm going to be talking about 3 modes of learning that, in my opinion, you need to balance knowing what your objective is. But before we get started, quick announcement. Today is the last day of our Kickstarter. I've created, along with another 28 creators, a comic book anthology of 4-page short stories called Werewolves and Unicorns. In this book, you can find a collection of short stories around the topic of mythical creatures. So there's a lot of werewolves, there's a lot of unicorns, but there's also dragons, witches, Bigfoot, I think, is in there. There's griffins. There's all sorts of... and goblins, of course. So you're going to find a lot of really fun stories from up-and-coming indie creators that are trying to make a mark in the comic book industry. And, you need to watch out for some of these people because they're making amazing stuff. So link is in the description. Check it out, and let's get back to the show now. So let's get right into it. First of all, I wanted to talk about, when we talk about improving your comics, what exactly are we talking about? Because many a times, if you're talking to a writer, this writer will be talking about improving writing, and that's how he makes better comics. And if you're talking to an artist, this person will be talking about how they make better art. And the same will happen if you talk to a colorist or a letterer or a designer. They all have different levels of expertise and they're focusing on one thing. But what happens when you are a sole creator, an independent creator, or a graphic novelist that does absolutely everything? Well, in these situations, I think it's critical for you to ask yourself, what exactly do I want to improve? Because the reality is, in my opinion, you cannot become a master at every single thing that is necessary to make great comics. Even if you look at the great masters, you will find that some of them have strengths and mastery over some areas, and others have mastery over other areas. But there is no one comic creator that I can think of that has mastered every single element of comic making, because it's a very complex process, and in the majority of industries, it is a collaborative process where you have writers, letterers, you have designers, you have colorists, you have people that are specialized in each area to make the best possible comic. But when you're an independent author or you are a full author of graphic novels or comics, then you're on your own. So you have to make this decision of what exactly is it that I want to focus on. And so I've created this list of 6 things that you may want to focus your attention on when you are trying to improve your comics. So these 6 things are: number 1, art; 2, coloring; 3, lettering; 4, design; 5, writing; and 6, speed. And these are not in any particular order. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to talk about each of them separately. So, do you want to improve your art? That's number 1. And I think a lot of comic creators focus a lot on the art because it's your presentation letter, as it were. So if you're, for example, pitching to publishers or trying to find an agent or trying to find people to sell your comic to, your art is your introduction to all of these people. That's the first thing people will look at. Generally speaking, when you go to a comic shop, the first thing that grabs your attention is the art in the cover, and then you flip through the book. And if you like the art, you'll be very willing to give that comic book a chance. So I think art is one of the most basic things in comics. And obviously it's not everything. I'm not saying art is everything, but it is your gateway to people's attention. If you have art that can attract a specific group of readers, you have their attention, then you have an opportunity. But when the art is not there, when the art is not communicating or speaking to the people that could potentially buy or acquire your book, then you're in big trouble. So the first thing you want to know is, who are you aiming this book for? If it's a personal project that you're never going to show anybody, it doesn't really matter, does it? As long as it is something that you can draw and you enjoy personally, that's okay. But when you're aiming to make a comic for a specific group of readers, a good idea is to look at your art and be critical about whether it fits inside that market or not. So for example, let's say you want to make high fantasy comics. So you look at comics that have high fantasy themes and you look at the type of art they have. In general terms, the type of art those comics have is very figurative, meaning that it looks a lot like, it's very lifelike, it looks realistic. And if you look at Conan the Barbarian or other types of high fantasy concept comics, generally they're quite realistic. So if you're in a place with your art where you cannot draw realistic drawings consistently, then you should really think about improving your art. So that should be your focus, because you don't even have your letter presentation. However, if you want to make comics, let's say, for example, you want to make children comics, you want to work for Boom Studios making the Cartoon Network spin-offs because you love Cartoon Network shows and you want to do the Adventure Times and the Steven Universe comics, then you don't need realistic art. You need other type of arts. You need to look into cartooning, expressive drawing. So when we're talking about improving your art, we're not talking about trying to reach one specific goal. We're looking at what is your aim, who is this comic for, and how does the rest of the comics in this market look to that place so that you have that correct look to enter that market. However, if you are a complete independent author that wants to create books that have a unique style that fit your unique stories, then, improving your art is not really, in a technical level, is not really a concern. It would be more a concern about your style, like what is the style you are going for and what style do you need for your specific type of stories. So you have two options when you want to improve your art. Option number one is focus on developing a style that is close to the style that fits an industry because you want to enter a market or an industry, or focus on developing a style that fits your stories so that you can create a cohesive narration and you can be a very unique author. So it's not as straightforward as one may think. It's not just a question of studying art. It's exactly what do you want first and then deciding what to do with your art after you have made that decision. But of course, all I am talking about here is a style and how the style you're aiming for will affect what you study. But there are two elements here to improve your art that are non-negotiable. The first one would be fundamentals, because no matter what style you're drawing in, if you are drawing something that resembles reality in any way, you will have to have an understanding of fundamentals such as perspective, proportion, line, etc. I'm not going to go into the fundamentals here, but you will need at least a basic understanding of those. And the second aspect of art that is a non-negotiable is tools. You need to master your tools. You cannot aim to create art that is compelling if you don't understand how to use your tools. And again, with these two new elements comes a lot of questioning and a lot of decisions you need to make when it comes to tools. One of the most basic ones, do I want to do digital art? Do I want to do traditional art? Do I want to do a mix of both? Do I want to do both? Because the look you get from both of them is slightly different, but you have to master those tools, because there is no point in you saying I'm going to do digital art if you don't even know how to use a graphic tablet or what tools to use inside the programs you're using. And the same goes for traditional. What's the point in saying I'm going to use brush pens to ink my comic if you have no control over the brush because you haven't mastered that tool. So mastering tools, I think, is one of the very most important things that you can do. So if you haven't decided exactly what style or what market you want to enter, I think a good first step would be to start playing around with your tools, seeing what you're more comfortable with, and, maybe go from there. Go from the tools and the mediums you most enjoy and see what markets you can enter with those tools and what styles fit better those tools. The same goes for fundamentals. Maybe you are very strong at perspective, but not so strong at figure drawing and proportion. So maybe you could consider types of drawing that are more technical rather than expressive. So maybe cartooning is not so much for you and you should go more into more technical aspects of drawing or more technical styles. Personally, art is one of the areas I focus on the most, simply because this is one of the areas of comics that I really like. I really like the stories, obviously, but if a book has great art, if it's got bad story, I don't mind so much. I'll still buy a few issues just to look at the art because I love it. So that's why I'm focusing more on the art side. First, because I'm an artist mainly, and second, because I love cartoons. I've always loved them. I love to look at them, and I enjoy doing that side of things. So that's personally why I decided to focus more on art. But let's face it, not everyone is as shallow as me. Not everyone looks like the comic and thinks, oh my God, that cover is gorgeous. I don't care what's inside of it. I'm going to buy it. Not everyone's like me. I mean, I know for a fact that a lot of people are like me, but not everyone. So art is not everything. And let's move on to the next section, which is coloring. Okay. Of course, a lot of people will think, well, there are entire comics that have no color in it. One of the most successful comic industries in the planet, which is the manga industry. We have all of them are in black and white. Nobody cares. People love those comics and they buy them and nobody cares about that. However, even the manga industry knows that color is more eye-catching and color is just nicer. It's just nicer to have things in color. And in fact, if you look at the big publications in Japan, they all have color covers. If color weren't important, they wouldn't bother making color covers. And if color wasn't important, you wouldn't have central color pages in every Shonen Jump. Because they know that people like color and you like to see things in color. And even though you are very into the story and you have this black and white comic and you're still enjoying it, when you see that color cover, that's what draws you in. Color is important. The reason why manga is in black and white is because of the printing tradition and because they do very cheap anthology type publications, and making things in black and white makes the product cheaper. And at the end of the day, that's what you want. You want kids to be able to buy your comics, and that's why they have them in black and white. Not because it's better, but because it's cheaper. And because that reduces the cost, and then kids can afford it. But they still will have the covers in color. They still will have special editions with color, because color is premium. Color is better. We all know that. So when you have great color in your book, I mean, people will pay extra for that. If you have a art book and it's all in black and white, it's not as attractive and you won't be as drawn to it as if you have an art book with great colors and fantastic illustrations which are full colored. We all know color adds value, and color also can have a big impact on the storytelling. So never underestimate the power of color, and maybe you want to consider whether you want to improve the coloring in your comics. Personally, there's 3 things that I find interesting about color and that I would like personally to improve, which are light. I think placement of light is super important. I include this in color, although in black and white comics, you have cross-hatching and you have screen tones to indicate light. So light is super important, whether you have color or not. And then the color palettes and how they affect storytelling. In particular, I would like to talk about one webcomic that became a published comic, which is called Cucumber Quest, where they have amazing use of color. They don't have hardly any line in their work. It's just color. It's a lineless style, and each scene has a different color palette to indicate mood and to highlight important elements. So color there becomes one of the tools that they use for storytelling. So don't think that color is a superficial marketing tool. It can be a very powerful narrative tool. So don't underestimate color. It's a great tool, especially for those who can use it well. Next up is design and lettering. And I'm not going to talk at length about these two things. First of all, because I'm not knowledgeable enough. And secondly, because I have utter respect and admiration for every comic artist out there that is good at design or lettering. Yes, art and coloring are important to create a great look for your comic. But if your lettering is rubbish, nobody is going to be physically able to read your comic. I have comics in my shelf that I picked up because they looked amazing and I haven't ever read them because I can't physically bring myself to read it because the font is too small and too hideous, and it honestly destroys the look of the entire comic. I have a comic that is seriously, it's like they took Times New Roman 12, they cut the balloon and they just stuck it on top of a beautiful illustration, and it just feels like they murdered the comic with that horrible lettering. Unfortunately, lettering and design are two things where, in my opinion, if it's good, you will never notice it's there. It's part of making the reader's experience flow and making the reader's experience enjoyable, but you will only notice when it's bad. And that's very sad for letters and designers. But it is what I feel most readers will perceive. They will say like, oh, the lettering is horrendous. But when you read a comic with good lettering, you'll never stop and say, wow, that lettering was amazing. But you will always say, oh, the art was amazing. Or the story was amazing. But poor old letterers never get credit. And they do an amazing service to comics. So think about that. Think about lettering and design, because those two elements do make a massive impact on how well your comic looks. And maybe you're focusing too much on art and coloring. And these two elements are tremendously important too. In fact, lettering is one of the areas that I think I need to focus on if I want to make my comics better in the future. Then again, you can always think, well, I cannot master everything, so maybe rather than having mediocre lettering, maybe I want to hire a letterer and pay them so that they letter my comic, or maybe I want to hire a colorist. That's an option. You can focus on one area and create creative teams. This is why a lot of the times people in the manga industry have assistants. Maybe their assistants are doing the backgrounds, or this is why in the American industry they have teams of creative people. They have letters, colorists, writers, etc. Moving on to the next point. We've talked about art. We've talked about coloring. We've talked about lettering and design. But all of those are the visual part of comics. How about we talk about the writing part now? So writing. I don't think I need to make a case for writing comics. Obviously, if you are writing a comic that is a story, the quality of the writing will definitely make a difference to the quality of the comic overall. When you pick up a comic because it looks amazing, like art, coloring, lettering, design, it's all amazing. You pick it up and you're reading it and you think the story is rubbish. The reaction will be like, oh, it's such a shame that the art is so amazing, but the story is so bad. So it actually ruins the entire thing. This is why I decided to go in this order, because like you have good art, check. You have good coloring to accompany, great. You just enhanced it. The lettering and design is good, great. You didn't destroy that art and you made it better. And now we're into writing, and writing is the foundation. If you don't have good writing, what is the point in honing all the other crafts, art, coloring, lettering, and design? What is the point in all of that? To embellish a terrible story? There's no point, really. Everything that happens visually in a comic is in the service of the story or the narrative inside that comic. If you're trying to highlight how ugly the world is, maybe you even want to have ugly art and you want it to look horrible, because that serves the writing and that serves the story. So I think at this point we've gone full circle and back, because you're considering how to make your writing, coloring, lettering, and design better, but how to make those visual elements better rely on what you're trying to accomplish with your writing. So having clear ideas on why you're writing, what you're trying to communicate, and what is the best visual to enhance that story is the whole point. Now, not everyone is a writer, not everyone wants to write, but I think every comic artist would benefit from understanding story and understanding what the writer is trying to achieve. So maybe, even though if you're an artist, you don't want to be learning the entire craft of writing, a little bit would go a long way. I think writing, in a sense, is part of the fundamentals of comic art and comic design and lettering and everything, because you need to understand the story, you need to understand what the writer is trying to do in order to serve that story and make the best comic. Because the best comics are not those that look perfect, the best comics are those that convey the story in the best possible way to connect with the reader. At least that's my opinion. So, when you want to improve your writing, you study certain things, but as an artist, if you want to improve your understanding of writing, obviously you want to be reading a lot and communicating very, very well with your writer so that you understand the story well and their intentions. Some writers are highly specific with what they write, such as Alan Moore. If you read one of his scripts, is torture, is a method of torture, but he's so specific and so detailed in his panel descriptions that you could cry reading them. I mean, reading a comic script is painful as it is, but Alan Moore's comic scripts are even more painful. Finally, I spent more than 20 minutes talking about these 5 elements, so I'm going to just very quickly mention the last one, which is speed. If you can't do all of these things fast, then don't even bother, because life is too short to make good comics if you're not fast. And that's all I have to say about that. Okay, let's move on to the second part of this discussion, which is how do you improve these 6 different aspects? And I would like to separate 3 different things that you can do. You can A, practice. You can B, learn. And you can C, correct your mistakes. First of all, we have practice. A lot of people make so much noise about the importance of practicing art. And yes, it is very important to practice. Why? Because practice improves your consistency. That is how likely you are to repeat the same style of drawing and the same quality of drawing page after page after page, which is tremendously important for comics, because if you have a great page and a rubbish second and third and then a fourth one that is good, you just ruin the experience. Again, this is all about what the experience of the reader is. So yeah, practice will improve your consistency, and this is key for comics. And practice will improve your speed, which, as we quickly said a minute ago, is very important for comics, because comics take ages and you want to be fast doing whatever you're doing in your comics. However, practice will not make you a better artist. It will make you more consistent, so it will make you always hit that higher tier of your ability as an artist consistently, and it will make you faster, but it will not make you better in itself. So in my opinion, when an artist is consistently getting, and when I say artist, I also mean writer, designer, letterer, sorry, I'm generalizing here, but when a craftsperson in comics is told, oh, you need to practice, and they are given no direction, no specific feedback as to what exactly they need to practice, it probably means that at the moment they are toying around with a lot of concepts that they haven't mastered yet, and they need to focus on getting better at those. Of course, learning without practice is nothing, but so is practice without learning. So there is this debate sometimes between people that believe that you should draw a lot and practice, and other people where they sit down and read the theory and think about it a lot. The marriage of those two things is what generates progress. However, there is a third element, which is correcting your mistakes. Now, it is inevitable, I think, in a way, unless you are being completely afraid and very, very careful. And even then, I don't think you can avoid it. To the point, I don't think you can ever learn something and practice it without ever making mistakes. You are bound to make mistakes in your understanding of the concepts you're being given or in the way you practice them, and so you're going to develop two types of mistakes. You're going to develop bad habits, and you're going to develop misunderstandings. And those are problems that can be pointed at by people on the outside, but you probably won't be able to pick up on them on your own. And this is where critique comes in. Critique is important not because you learn from critique or not because you can practice through critique, but because people looking from the outside and people that are knowledgeable, or maybe people that don't know that much but have a good eye for whatever you're trying to accomplish, they will be able to point out bad habits and things and holes in your knowledge that you may not have been able to see because you're so much into your learning and your practice and you get into the zone and you just don't have perspective to realize that you have those problems. Critique is key, in my opinion, to take the next step in your learning, but you probably shouldn't be seeking critique when you're in the process of trying to understand something or trying to practice something and you know for a fact you haven't mastered it. Because if you're trying to master, let's say, color theory, and you only just learned it and you've been practicing it for a couple of months, and then you put that piece in front of people and say, what do you think about this piece? And people say, I think you need to improve your color theory. That will only bring more frustration because you know that you're not good at color theory. You're trying to improve color theory. So why would you put yourself in a position where people are putting you down for something you already know is bad? So maybe if you're looking for critique outside color theory because you are sick of getting color theory comments, you say, look, I know my color theory knowledge is rubbish. I'm working on it, but I'm a bit tired of it. Can you please tell me something else that would make this piece better? And maybe people are completely unable to do that. And if they're unable to do that, it's because your color theory and your color compositions are so bad that whatever is out there aside from that, it's invisible because the color is so bad. So, just make sure that when you put pieces out there for critique, be it writing, art, lettering, whatever, that you're ready to take in the critique and to accept that maybe if they're telling you 1,000 times the same thing, maybe you should work on that and forget about everything else, even if it annoys you. And that's all I have to say about critique. And that's all I have to say about this whole business because I'm done with this podcast. So, in conclusion, step number 1 of making your comics better is decided what do you want to improve. And deciding what you want to improve goes hand in hand with deciding what type of comics do you want to make. Once you know that, you look at your fundamentals, your tools, your style, and you try to improve it in the 6 areas: art, coloring, lettering, design, writing, or speed. How do you improve those areas, as we said in section 2, is either by practicing, learning, or putting yourself out there for critique and correcting your mistakes. And that's all I have to say about this topic. I hope you find it useful or at least enjoyable. Have lots of fun learning, practicing, and thinking about what types of comics you want to make. And I'll see you in the next Teresa Talks Comics. Bye-bye!